Last week saw a heated exchange in the Oval Office between President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. It really was remarkable, and responses have been polarized, to say the least. Some say Zelenskyy was disrespectful. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't say thank you. And if anything, this was what Donald Trump was elected to do. This is America first. And then others say this was a dark day for America, for democracy, for the global defense of freedom. America is sidling up to Vladimir Putin and Russia. So before we do anything else today, I just want to go around the panel and ask, where do you all fall on that spectrum? Matt, let's start with you.
I think this was the biggest single one-day accelerant of a trend that should have happened 3 years ago, 3 decades ago, that namely Europe should be responsible for European security. I think that the short-term questions are whether Europe is going to defy all recent history and be up for that task, whether Ukraine will be force-fed a deal to sacrifice a lot of non-Crimea territory in exchange for not having security guarantees, and whether American public opinion is ready to support a foreign policy that resembles more Tony Soprano.
Nick, dark day for America or America first, finally?
I found J.D. Vance in particular appalling in his temperament and whatnot. But, it's Zelenskyy is the one who screwed this up. He's the one who needed it more. It's a sad day for many, many reasons. And hopefully something good will come out of it. But I'm doubtful.
Katherine, where do you fall?
Thank God we don't have a lady president, because I hear that women would be too emotional under pressure. I mean, seriously, I do think this is just a display of temper. It's a display of kind of personal biases and personal hobby horses. Why was the word Hunter Biden's bathroom said? No one will ever know. And I think it is, in that sense, a dark day for America. We looked silly and petulant as a nation.
By now, you have probably all seen or heard about the Zelenskyy kerfuffle, which is definitely not an unmade Jason Bourne movie. But I just want to start by playing a clip to give you a sense of the tone and tenor of the exchange.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards.
Cards.
Right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing
I'm
cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of
world.
millions of people.
You're
gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
Nick, when we were talking about this before the show, you said this reminded you of a good dust-up on a podcast, and I assume that's because there was an invocation of World War III and a lot of interrupting. Can you just say more about that? What did you make of this exchange, and just of the kind of unusual tenor of it?
I think it's important to watch the full thing because, that particular clip that you showed, and the little bit before it and after, where J.D. Vance really lights into Zelenskyy, for being ungrateful and for, taking offense, even though Donald Trump has been calling Zelenskyy a dictator. But when you watch the whole thing, you recognize that this is why you don't do diplomacy in real time. They should have had a deal that was agreed to ahead of time, and this should have been a signing ceremony for that at best. And instead, you try to negotiate things partway through and deals fall apart. That's, in a way that it was like that. It was unscripted, and it's really unfortunate ultimately for Zelenskyy. He's the one who needed the deal. I feel terrible for Ukraine and for Ukrainians, and I can't stand the way in which Republican leaders are increasingly saying that somehow Zelenskyy is the person who started the war, and that this is what he deserves. That is wrong, but it's also needs to be said that Zelenskyy is the guy who needs this more. I don't oppose the idea of the U.S. not being involved in Ukrainian security at all. But Zelenskyy really fucked up here. It does not excuse the way that Trump and Vance act. This is not a good look for America, but it's also, ultimately this failure in this way at that time, it's really on Zelenskyy.
Matt, Nick said that people need to watch the whole exchange. He also said that Zelenskyy screwed up in certain ways here. And I think a lot of people who are defending Donald Trump have kind of made similar points, saying, look, this little exchange takes things out of context. If you play the whole interview, right, 40 minutes or so, it actually looks like Zelenskyy is the instigator here. And people have also said Zelenskyy has a history of dust-ups with foreign leaders in prominent meetings, right? He makes people mad. He makes them aggravated. What do you think of that argument? Do you think that that is a good defense of how this went down?
Reminds me a lot of what anti-interventionists were browbeating the Kuwaiti monarchy in 1990 for being an illiberal, which it was, authoritarian regime, which it was, and it was also the victim of being swallowed whole by a neighbor. And so what was the most important thing to stress at any given time? I don't doubt that Zelenskyy is not always cuddly and not always effective. He's sometimes very effective, but he does have a reputation in Ukraine as well as other places of being a bit of a hothead. That is, and I agree with Nick that he screwed up here. Like, his job was not to do this, and to also recognize that J.D. Vance, who I think is the instigator here, not Zelenskyy, that J.D. Vance is set up to do this. J.D. Vance's whole political kind of value add or character was all like, how quickly can I get every conversation of Ukraine to be about the border and fentanyl and illegal aliens? Like, can we do that in 2 sentences, or can we get it into one? If it's 1 sentence, can we get it into 8 words? He's been doing that for 3 or 4 years. And
he's going to be great on TikTok, right? This is the whole thing, is just you say what you mean in the first sentence and then go from there.
Well, I mean, actually, in addition to being a joke, it's there's some element of kind of barstool sports diplomacy from Vance. I mean, how many people in the MAGA orbit, or just people who are watching this and enjoying it, are like given a booyah, sweet sassy molassy, with J.D. Vance's performance here, which is just kind of gross and silly, and I think it's not necessarily resonant with where Americans are. Americans have soured on giving money to Ukraine, but for a very long time, Americans were very much in support of that because Ukraine was playing defense, and that is the most important thing to consider here. Nick is very right to point out that there's been a lot of pointing at Zelenskyy as if he started this, as if he's the one who's gambling with World War III, and pinning the blame on him. Trump has done it several times. He is not to blame for this. Russia is to blame on it. In fact, some of the arguments in the Oval Office was J.D. Vance and Trump trying to tell Zelenskyy, like, oh, don't call Putin a dictator. That's not nice. This kind of gets to where they are trying to do this very rapid change of roles of where America stands values-wise in this conflict. And I think that is indicative of what's going to be happening going forward, is that America is going to be in a position of trying to weigh in basically on Russia's side comparatively in this war, which is quite startling and quick. And again, is what Europe is doing right now, is trying to scramble and to see whether it can provide this thing that America or Europe have not been able to do for 30 years, which is provide an actual security guarantee to Ukraine. Biden wouldn't do it. Obama wouldn't do it. Trump wouldn't do it. America's not going to do that. So Europe has to do that if that is going to be done, and if that's going to be part of this peace negotiation.
Katherine, Matt said that Zelenskyy isn't always cuddly, but sometimes he is, because sometimes he is the voice of Paddington Bear. This is a real fact about Zelenskyy, is he was the voice of Paddington in Paddington Bear 2.
Но мне мило. Я очень надеюсь, что у меня тоже есть такие черты. По крайней мере, я стараюсь. Він мене надихає. Это как минимум.
And this is the thing that struck me watching some of the clips, especially from where it got a little bit more heated, is both of these guys.
Are you talking about Paddington or the White House office?
Yes.
Obviously, I spent my weekend watching both, and I've got a mashup video for you guys. It's really incredible. It's AI powered. It's just Paddington Bear.
No, thank you.
Right, and it's Paddington Bear talking to the guest star of Home Alone 2 in the Oval Office. That is what we witnessed. And then you have J.D. Vance, who came up as an online commentator, troll type, arguably the world's most successful bearded podcast guy, and he pops in with his smart remarks. This is a very familiar type of exchange to people who follow American political discourse, but there's also a kind of entertainment. It's also just a performance and just a show. And what do you make of that? What does this particular dramatic moment tell us about the United States and the way it's doing politics and just the way all of this is happening under Trump?
I don't think it's Paddington and Home Alone, and I don't think it's a podcast. I think it's reality TV. If we're picking our media, this is literally when people stop being polite and start getting real. This is garbage reality TV where it's sort of real conflict, but it's also manufactured conflict for the cameras, and nobody exactly knows what's going to happen once they start talking. That's what happened here. I do think Matt is right. On some level, it is so wild. It is so unhinged that we are debating who started this war. What? Russia invaded Ukraine. With the military. It's very, very, very simple. And this is not out of character for Putin or for Russia. This is what they do. This is what they've always done. And so I do think there's the oddness of that kind of underlies so much of this discussion. But it is also right to say the U.S. isn't going to do security guarantees. The U.S. doesn't do that. And so, the idea that Zelenskyy was coming, ready to hand over these mineral rights, ready to kind of do this bad deal to hold on to a bad status quo in hopes of something sorting itself out in the future, maybe it's not a bad thing that holding pattern ended up getting disrupted.
So, fun fact for the Reason superfans is that in the only season of The Real World that was shot in Washington, D.C., was shot less than 1 block from the old Reason office. Not literally the same building, but a building that was effectively connected to our office. And so we'd just be going out to get coffee sometimes, and we'd be like, hey, there's the Real World shooting on the sidewalk. It's very strange. And also, that was the least popular season of The Real World.
I was going to say, D.C. Real World doesn't really intrigue America. What a surprise.
All right, so let's talk about
khakis.
Yeah, but I mean, let's not, it's Oscar weekend and all of that, but I mean, this is a reality that goes far beyond whether or not it's entertaining or whatnot. And I think, it pains me unbelievably that Ukraine, the leader of Ukraine has fucked up. He had to, on a profound level, eat some shit publicly in order to get what was going to be the best deal available. And it's important to remember, America doesn't owe Ukraine a defense, a security deal or anything like that. And I'm not trying to blame Zelenskyy per se, but it's it's horrifying what happened. And I also think that a lot of people in the United States, not just people who already hate J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, I think this moved a lot of people to be okay, these guys are not the people that I want representing us. Because again, this decision also comes without any explanation or any larger discussion of what are our foreign policy aims. Because when America does something, it's not just for that particular place. It's also sending messages around the world and things like that. And it's worth remembering, and I say this as a non-interventionist, the United States has shown itself over the past decade to be one of the worst allies you could possibly be. You can do everything that we ask of you or demand of you or tell you to do, and then we pull out anyway and we pull support from you immediately. We're bad at nation building and all of this kind of stuff. And from the U.S. point of view, this is not good. The United States, is alienating itself, I think, from many American voters, but more importantly, from people around the world in a way that will hurt us when it comes to things like trade and diplomacy and cultural exchange. That was a clip from the latest Reason Roundtable. If you want to see more clips, go here. If you want to see the whole episode, go here. Make sure to subscribe at Reason's YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening, watching, or both.